because the more contentious we become, right, the less they want to get close. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're united, but they've got these claws up.
Exactly.
Welcome to the Carla Rand Show, a weekly podcast designed to dig into the lives of everyday people. People who are making a positive impact, people who have risen above and overcome obstacles. Insights and stories from ordinary individuals who inspire us all towards the truly extraordinary. Here's your host.
Hey, it's Carla, and I'm so excited about this interview with Sharon Neufeld. Sharon was my professor, one of my professors at Bible college 20 years ago. And I remember one time she was coming through the dorms and she came into my room and I was like, wow, because I really looked up to her, and she sat on the bed and she was just like, hey, Carla, how are you doing? And I felt really honored to have her in there, because everything that she said, she spoke truth, and she would always exhort, not just encourage. She would encourage you, but she would exhort you to what can you do? How can you improve? And how can you follow the Lord ultimately? And I haven't connected with her for a long time, although my husband and I did go to a marriage conference with her husband that they were running, and it was amazing. It was at the Bible college. That was quite a few years ago now. But anyways, it was just so good to connect with her and so good to hear from her. And everything that she said was so powerful, and she really has a way of cutting through the surface and really getting to the deeper issues. So I know you're going to love this one, and let's listen. Well, I have Sharon Neufeld with me today, and I'm so happy to have Sharon here. Sharon is actually the wife of what used to be the president, or he was my prof in Bible college, and he taught me a couple of my classes, and you also taught me when I was my freshman year of Bible college. You taught me women in ministry class, and so that was such a great class. Taught me how to speak, taught me how to do so much research and how to put a talk together and all the rest of it. And then just watching your life and getting to know your husband as a prof and your family was just really impacted me, Sharon. So I just want to welcome you to the Carla Rand Show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. What year were you at PRBI?
That would have been 99 to 2001.
Okay.
Yeah. So
very good. I was trying to remember when that was. So okay.
Yeah. So,
excellent.
Well, there was a lot
great to see you, Carla.
Yeah, thank you. It's so nice to have you. And I remember, Sharon, I just got a couple of things about what I remember about you. So first of all, I remember when you taught that class. And I remember one of the things that you said, and for some reason this stuck with me. And you said, you know what, it was just a really tactical thing, because you taught a lot of things about scriptures and whatever, but it was a very tactical thing. And you said you should always keep at least one bathroom clean for when you have company, that they can use the clean bathroom. I was like, that is a good tip. So I've done that my whole life. I always have at least one, the company bathroom has got to be clean. Boys, can you please not use that bathroom? So, yeah.
That's right.
Or at least clean up after yourself.
Well, I've been accused. I've had others tell me that they remember. Of course, this is going to date all of us, but I said that we shouldn't find our identity in our pantyhose.
Yes, nice.
Hardly anybody wears it anymore. But I was telling a story about speaking and having a great big hole, which I didn't see and didn't realize in the back of my leg. And it was very obvious.
Yeah, and
I'm glad you remembered something a little better.
Something a little bit better, yeah. Oh, no, it was good. It was really good. So Sharon, let's go back. Let's give everybody a little bit of context, kind of who you are. Where did you grow up? What were maybe some hobbies that you did? What was school like for you? Just give us a little bit of context of who you are and something about your family, your upbringing, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Well, when you say, where am I from? I started out in Pennsylvania. So, but I wasn't there my whole life. I lived in numerous places. My dad eventually, after he became a Christian, eventually went to Bible school in Saskatchewan. And then after Bible school, he moved to Manitoba, and he pastored a church for 2 years. And then he went into farming. So I've lived a number of places. And what was beautiful about Manitoba was that's where I met Waldy. So, that's a very condensed version. So, I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in a Christian home in that my parents became Christians after I was, 2 years old. But they were very young in their faith. There was lots of things they had to learn. and lots of things that they carried with them from their past into their marriage and into our home, which, in every home there's beauty and there's harm. And so there was lots of things that I experienced that definitely impacted me. And, and in one hand, moving lots also just really helped me to learn how to meet new people, how to adapt to new circumstances, but it also had its challenges as well.
Yeah.
So that was my start in life. And of course I met Waldy in Manitoba, but I didn't meet him until I was in my last year of high school. And we got married right out of high school.
Okay.
And he was out of high school for 1 year. So he was a whopping 19 years old and I was all of 18. But you know what? I was older than my mom. My mom was 16 when she got married. So
wow.
Yeah, there's a tradition of, getting married when you're really young.
Yeah.
So Waldy and I got married and we went to Bible school right away for just 1 year though. And we didn't think we'd be going back to Bible school. We farmed, we had grain and cattle. And so we just went back to the farm and we farmed for 8 years. And during that time, we really wanted to serve God. And I think there was a desire to do more than farming that had to be developed in us. And, we worked with the youth. We had a desire to know and serve God, but we weren't sure what that would look like. And Waldy was extremely shy. So we weren't sure where that would fit in. But we had a number of things happen to us, Carla, that, when you say you want God's will, you got to be ready for things that can happen. And one of the things, I won't tell you everything that happened, but one of the things that happened was we had a fire and we lost our home and everything that we owned. And that just really started us down, a path of just evaluating a number of things. And so after 8 years of being on the farm, we actually left the farm and he went back to Bible school. And I went to work with 3 kids by that point and helped put him through school. And then in his last semester of Bible college, we had our 4th and our final child. So that was, that brought us into the Bible school area. And he thought, that he would go into this ministry that was mentoring young men who were being brought out of the inner cities in the States and would be taken to a ranch where men would train them and help them to know how to be a man and how to be a dad. And so we thought that was a good fit with Waldy's background. But just like 2 months before we were supposed to leave Canada and move to the States, the whole ministry changed. And that was no longer available to us. And so then we were left with, oh, now what? And so that's when, but we were all set up and I changed our visas because I was American. I changed our visas to get green cards for the entire family. And we moved to North Carolina, where Waldy worked in steel construction with my family. And so after a year there, he formed his own company with my younger brother. And we did steel construction until we realized, we still want to do ministry. So we sold out of that and went to Dallas, where he got his seminary degree. And again, I went to work to support him. So, it's interesting that my education, Carla, is so eclectic. It's not your normal finish high school, go to college, get a degree in an area. Mine was on the job training, and I was typically put from the time I started working out of the home, I was typically put in management positions overseeing a lot of people. And so I had to learn how to work with people. And I think some of that came, learning even how to read people came from when I was a child. I was super sensitive to what was going on around me. And I learned early on to read the signs. what's going on with people. And now I didn't always accurately interpret it, but I learned early on how to read people and be aware of my setting. But I also knew I was the go-getter. I loved marketing. I loved sales. I loved management. So those things were easy for me. But I mean, God just kept putting me into new positions so that when he went to seminary, I was working at a corporation and was quickly put into a senior management position. And I had all these people with all these various, areas that I was responsible for, and ended up having a very toxic boss who was like Jekyll and Hyde. And so, while I was there, he had his doctorate in economics. I have absolutely no college degree, but yet I'm heading up this huge department. And, God just had to teach me so much. And this boss required us to read books on management. And we had to take a course that he offered. And so, Carla, I mean, it's just bizarre because the last thing I wanted was to go to school. I did not like school. I did not like reading. That would require sitting down. That would require having to take tests. I was scared to death of that type of thing. The only books I read was marriage because I was scared to death of marriage. And I read every book I could find on marriage. And so here I was working at this corporation. And in order to work there, we had to take this course and you had to pass a test and it had to be 90 and above in order to stay. Oh, wow. And I thought, what have I done? Like, I don't like tests. I don't like this kind of thing, but he's going to seminary. We have 4 kids. I need a job.
Oh, man.
So I think it was great that God kind of pushed me into that area. Yeah. I ended up scoring the second highest of the class.
Good. Yeah.
So, God started challenging me and teaching me. And so that was what was kind of neat is that, God took me down a very different path when it came to my education than what most people have traveled.
So how did you get into counseling? And I think, how did you get into counseling and teaching?
Well, okay, here's the next crazy thing is while we were in Dallas, I left that toxic corporation job and God opened a door. I was asked if I would head up a radio counseling ministry. Me. But our pastor at the time just said, you know what, Sharon, you would be great for this person. I wasn't the host. I wasn't the one doing the counseling. But, when you start running a radio daily ministry counseling, you have lots to learn. So not just the operation, but we had guests on our show that talked about everything. And, whenever we did topics like incest or sexual abuse, I mean, our counseling and mail would triple. And I had to oversee that whole counseling area as I oversaw the production of everything. And it felt so strange because it's like, what am I doing? But, it was God's education for me to learn biblical counseling. And he taught me lots while I was there. But I have to say that one of the biggest things for me, Carla, was that I was a high energy person, but I didn't know why. I never stopped to say, what's really driving me? Why do I expend so much energy? And I was willing to work. But, when I started in Dallas is where God started showing me and helping me to name the fears that were actually driving me. So, I had fears of being found out. Like, what if people realize I'm really not an educated person, which was not true. I was educated, but just not the same way other people were.
Right.
I had more fears of the evil one than I did of God. I had fears of, of just being too much that, and yet not enough. Because what are you bringing to the job? What are you bringing to relationships? Am I enough? So I had all these fears that were driving me. And when I started working at this radio counseling ministry, I was sent to Chattanooga, Tennessee, because that's where the ministry was. And I was supposed to move this entire operation from Chattanooga, Tennessee into Dallas. And while I was there, I read one of their books that they were talking about on the show, and it was called Telling Yourself the Truth. Wow. That book it was so stark, the incongruencies that were in my life. So I had all this knowledge about God, but if I was to really name what was going on inside and what was really driving Sharon, there was a huge difference. And so that book and the concepts in that book really started me on a really good journey of being able to start naming the lies I believed and start looking at, where did they come from? How did I come to some of this place? So that was my journey. And, so I learned a lot about counseling, but I wasn't the counselor.
Okay.
And so when we came to Dallas, when we came to PRBI, Waldy went there to teach. And of course I went to work, but I was asked to be in development, and I was doing the fundraising, the recruitment, and all the big events. And one day Waldy asked if I would teach women in ministry. And I'm like, okay, because, I could do that, because by that point I was really grabbing a hold of all the things that God had to teach me about what does it really mean to be a woman of God, and where is her worth found, and how does she begin to develop, a vision for her life. And so I was passionate about that. And he gave me the syllabus. Well, you have to remember, I have no college degree. So I'm trying to go, how do I put a syllabus together? And how do I put assignments together? And then how do you mark them? And so I thought, women in ministry, that's cool, because I'm not really faculty, but I'm teaching this one course. And so that's okay. But yet in 2000, when I left the development department, the school asked if I would teach full time. And I'm like, I'm not faculty. And is this even allowed? Like, can somebody who's not accredited, how do you do this? So my education, again, I was asked to teach like people helping. And that was a lay counseling course, no syllabus, no material. I had to build it all. And then I was asked if I would teach a Bible course, and that was on the book of Ruth and Esther. And so that probably the thing that, like, Waldy always accused me of being like a dog with a rag. When I have something I'm going to do, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to learn it. He used to accuse me of running a tight ship.
Yeah.
So, so then I had to jump in and try to learn, how do you teach? I was afraid of students throwing tomatoes at me, or what if they ask me questions that I have no clue about, right? Like I had all these fears, but that God just had to really challenge me on to say, trust me.
Yeah.
And, one of my theme verses all the way through in my life has been James 1:5, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. And, God has never failed me. He always gave me wisdom. And, another verse that has been so meaningful to me was, once I realized the fears that I had and started realizing where those fears came from and what I really believed about God and all of that. Psalm 34, where David says, this poor man cried and the Lord heard him and delivered him from all his fears. And so God has taken me on a journey of facing my fears, but being willing, because I didn't think I was a smart person. I didn't think I had the ability to teach. So that's why it wasn't even something I pursued. But, it's interesting because after I taught those 2 courses, the very next year I was asked to teach family studies. And again, it's another counseling course. And this time I was given some material and I was like, finally, but it wasn't from the school. It was from somebody outside of the school. Because I read all these books and I'm like, But when I got this material, it shook my world, Carla. It was from Dan Allender, and the stuff that he talked about in that course material. I had to adapt it because it was a seminary level course, and I had to adapt it, and I had tried to understand it. But it took Waldy and I to another whole level in our marriage. It brought things out about relationships. And it was one of those tools that God used to just open my eyes more to what causes problems. Because that was my whole passion. And that's why I didn't mind teaching people helping. That's why I didn't mind studying God's word, because I was always hungry to know, why do we sin? What's going on in my heart? Why am I driven? Where do these things come from? How can I grow? How can I live with other people? So this was a great opportunity for me to do the search, and then have to teach it. And of course, as you teach something, you have to learn it, because you can't teach something that you don't know, and you can't take somebody counseling where you haven't been willing to go.
That's so true. I love the things that you're saying, Sharon. And like a couple of things that I just want to point out quick is you mentioned about how you didn't really have any like education, you didn't have any degrees, you didn't have any post-secondary, and yet you were able to do so many things and you learned on the job. And that's just one area that I'm seeing more and more. I think it's becoming maybe more talked about now, that like there's a lot of different ways to get educated, and just going to college, getting a degree or getting a certificate is really not the only way. And sometimes on the job training is actually better. Significantly better than just going and getting a degree. Obviously, you need a degree if you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be, some kind of, like a certificate for trades or whatever. But a lot of stuff, like you don't need to definitely like necessarily get a degree. You can learn on the job and probably do better that way. So, and you're kind of living proof of that. So that's really cool. And so I was curious though, when you said you started teaching women in ministry, do you remember the first year that you taught? Like, I'm wondering if that was the first year that I was there, because that would have been September of 99 that I would have been there. Do you remember?
No, I started teaching it probably back in 94, 93.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't like your first year or something. Yeah.
But I didn't teach it. I didn't teach it every year, because some years, because I was on the road representing the school. Right. So some years it just didn't work.
Yeah.
And so I started teaching it early on, putting it together, and then I had another lady that sometimes would step in for me.
Okay.
So that was good. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit?
It was really frightful for me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because it was, I just wanted, you kind of talked about the family ministries. I want to kind of get into that. I want to get into marriage here. People always tell you, like, when you first get married, okay, like, marriage is hard. But when you're standing there on your wedding day looking at your husband, you're like, this is not going to be hard. This is going to be a piece of cake, because he's so special and everything's going to be so perfect. But, like, can you just answer the question as best as you can? Like, why is marriage hard? Why isn't it just like a bed of roses all the time?
Do you know, it's so interesting, right? Because too often we watch movies that are an hour or too long, and, they get resolved within the hour. Mm-hmm. We watch the Disney and they live happily ever after. And so we have these wrong conceptions about marriage. And I think you said something very insightful, and that is we think, here's somebody who's going to be the answer to all of my heart cries and desires and ambitions. And because I love them, surely my marriage is going to be different than the norm. And we don't realize what marriage really is involving, and what it entails, and what God intended for marriage. So I think when you look at even answering that question, you have to look at, what perspective are you coming at answering the question with? So if you and I, coming from a Christian background, look at a biblical perspective of marriage, you've got to be able to say, what was God's intention, right? So that we understand what was his intent, so that we know why does it take so much work today? Okay. So if you go back to God's intent was that, he, first of all, is the creator. And if he's the creator and he's the designer, he has a design. And I think the other thing that I had to come to know about God is that he's a relational God. He dwells in community as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So as a relational God, he knows how relationships work. And I'm created, and so is Waldy, as a relational being made in his image. And so his intent was for us, first of all, when he breathed in us the breath of life, he wanted us first to have a relationship with him. And then he created us as male and female to have a relationship with each other. And that together, both of us being equal in essence, but being different in function, would somehow be a picture of who he is in relationship as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So, and he never created us to say, here, you now have creation and go live on your own. He always created us to be dependent upon him, because he put the principles and the laws and all those things into place for how relationships work and how the world is designed. And he intended for us to rely upon him for that. So there's that whole idea of relationship and what that really means. And so when he says the man is to leave his parents and be united to his wife, that's an exclusive relationship. And so as soon as you say exclusive, one of the things you have to say is, okay, wait a minute, I am no longer single. I am married and in a covenant relationship. So if I'm married, I cannot live like I'm a single person. And if I'm a single person, I cannot pretend and live like and expect the fullness that God has if I'm single and trying to live like I'm married. So there's certain principles that you have to kind of go, God has put those in place regardless of the fall. They still operate today. So he brought the male and the female together and asked them to have a covenant relationship between the two of them. And he said they should become one flesh. Now, we love the one flesh idea as far as the sex. We have that idea. But that one flesh is body, soul, and spirit. So when you think about, and he says, and the two shall become one, well, that oneness is on all three levels. That doesn't happen without work. And so we can talk about that, the body, soul, and spirit. And he says, and they were naked and not ashamed. So before the fall, there was not just a nakedness in their bodies. I mean, we always talk about that in Sunday school, right? Like you put the fig leaves in front of them and cover up that part of them and stuff like that. But it was more the fact that they were transparent. There was nothing that was hidden from each other, and they never feared that the other person would take advantage of them or slight them, so that what the other person knew about them was safe. So think about that, Carla. That was what God intended, that there would be this transparency and that we would know each other on a spiritual level, our inner hearts, our emotional level, and physically. But when the fall takes place, man, that just destroyed so much, because when man said, I'm going to look outside of his design to find fulfillment, they are operating out of his design. But you can have, like people today want to have freedom, but freedom to them is to do whatever they want without any negative consequences. And you're not going to have that. You go outside of God's design, you're going to have negative consequences, which is exactly what happened in the garden. And so they decided to go against God's plan, and that left them broken. And that brokenness impacted them. And, you know, the transparency that God wanted for them, and that was such a beautiful gift between them, now became tarnished. Now they hid. And so they're hiding that interpersonal part of who they really are. Now they're hiding that from each other. And yet they want to be one. And we want to go to sex and think that sex is going to bring about the relational oneness without having to do the hard work of the relational work. So, you know, we have a propensity to hide. And the fall affected us on every level. We're broken inside. We have broken relationship between the man and the woman, and you know, and we were separated from God. And so that brokenness impacted us. Now we know that God is so good, because he set all that up, that richness. And yet we just kind of, said, no, thanks. And yet he still wanted to be in relationship with us. Mm-hmm. So that's why God provided a way through Jesus Christ that we could be back in relationship with him, because we need him to know how life works. He's the source of life. So we need him to understand, how do you do relationships? And seeing that was the part that it's like, I knew God, but I was scared to death of God. I was afraid of God the Father. I was afraid of his wrath. And so then how do you go to God and get help if you're afraid of him? Right? So marriage is going to take work, because we're in this broken state, and we want to have the oneness and the richness without looking at the transparency and looking at what's inside of us. So that's part of the challenge.
Yeah. And I guess that's like, it comes down to, I think a lot of people think anything in life, it's just going to happen. It's just going to happen. You don't have to go to school to learn to be married. You don't have to go to school to have kids. Like it'll just happen. The other stuff, okay, to be a doctor, you got to go to school. But I think it's like, no, it's not just going to happen. Like, there is going to be things that just happen, but a lot of those things aren't going to be great, right? So it's like, you have to be working, in order to sort of combat, I think, that sinful nature, and like in you as the wife, and in your husband too. So now you have these two sinful people that have their baggage from their past. They have like all kinds of stuff going on, and they're trying to connect and have like closeness and intimacy at all levels. Well, that's going to that's going to take some work, some serious work, right? Yeah. And it's no wonder that so many.
And absolutely. Mm-hmm. And you know what, it's like, I always talk about it like two rivers coming together. And when you bring two forceful rivers together and they meet, what do you have? Whitewater rafting.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like there's turbulence, because you're bringing two worlds together. You've had two different experiences. And Waldy and I are a prime case. Waldy's from Canada. I'm from the United States. He came from a very quiet Mennonite background. I came from a very loud, aggressive family. So, we had these very different experiences in life. The only common denominator really was that we both believed in Jesus Christ, but we had very different backgrounds. And you bring those together, you're going to have some problems, right? And you have your way of looking at things based on your family. And so you think why the other person is doing what they're doing based upon your perception, based upon your worldview that you developed, without really being curious to find out, why did they just do what they did? We think we automatically know based upon what we experienced, but we lose that curiosity to go, why did you just do what you did? And so we forget that they have an entirely different background. And, and the other thing, Carla, not only are we coming with two different experiences, but both of us are coming with desires and aspirations, dreams that we're hoping this other person's going to help us reach. But we're also coming with a lot of pain and heartache and baggage. And it's like, are we willing to talk about both? Because sometimes we think, if I talk about the one, then I won't get my dreams fulfilled. Or what do I need to do to please you so that I can get some of those things? So, I learned to operate in some very dysfunctional ways coming out of my background, coming out of what I experienced personally. So that's one of the reasons why marriage takes work. And God said that we're supposed to be, marriage is meant for transformation. Iron is supposed to sharpen iron. And we don't like it when people expose us, and especially our partner. And yet we're, right?
It's like, don't tell me that. I already know that.
Yeah. Right. And so it's hard if we can't even admit sin in our own life. We don't like it when somebody else points it out. Right.
Yeah.
So, and marriage is also meant to be a testimony. See, marriage is not just about Waldy and I. Marriage is to be about two people coming together as whole individuals and coming together with their strengths and their weaknesses, but bringing that to the world to point people to God, that, so that our marriage, the way we operate, the way we work together in relationship should be a reflection of what God is like to the world around them, that they would begin to go, I want to know your God based upon the way you guys operate differently. So there should be something about your marriage, the way that you honor and have dignity and respect each other and truly love each other. That should be a reflection of who God is to the world. So that takes work.
Yeah. Instead of just surviving, like, oh, my marriage is great because we survived 20 years or 25 years or 50 years. Like, we made it. Like, that's great that you stayed together. That's great. But I hope that marriage is more than just staying together. Like, I hope that we can thrive in a marriage and not just kind of survive it and like, okay, like we didn't get a divorce, I didn't shoot him, whatever, like we made it, So.
And you know what? And that is something that happens today and that's another reason why marriage takes work, is because you have a lot of times two singles living together and they're calling it marriage, but their worlds are not intersecting and they wonder why they're lonely and isolated and why after 20 years and the kids are gone and they get to that place of, I don't know you. And I don't know if I want to be in relationship with you. So what we have on the upswing today is higher and higher percentages of divorces happening for people in their 60s and 70s. And that's sad, but it's because we've never really worked at having a relationship that takes effort and takes getting to know each other during the whole process, not just like all of a sudden, Wally and I have been empty nesters for years, and we're still learning about each other. And there's a richness that can come. But if you have never really started that through that process, and you are now like in your 50s and heading into empty nest, what are you going to do with all that time? And there's no one to distract it. And that's why some people, they try to fill it with all sorts of things. And, Carla, that's the other reason why I think this whole thing is so crucial, is because if we don't deal with our pain, if we don't deal with the things that we bring with us into marriage, we just add to it. And if we don't address it, we're looking for comfort. And so what happens is couples end up going to various things trying to find release. So they're looking to work. They're looking to fitness. They're looking to food. They're looking to alcohol. They're looking to other relationships. They're looking to their kids. They're looking to all sorts of things, trying to fill that emptiness and the pain and the heartache that God says, that's not going to do it. So when you look in the wrong places again, you're not going to address that pain. So a lot of couples live together, but they don't address where do they go to find relief. And so that's why you have pornography. That's why you have emotional affairs. That's why you have all this stuff, because they're not really addressing that, but they still are looking for comfort. They're still looking for a place to get relief. And so that just adds to the complexity of relationships.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So Sharon, if somebody's, watching this, maybe, it's the ladies, okay? The ladies are watching this. What would be one thing or maybe a couple of things that they could do that would help them? Like, what obstacles do women typically have to get over? And I know everybody's different, so this is going to be a really broad sort of general thing. But what's typically with women, what obstacles do they have to get over so that they can connect better with their husbands? Can you speak to that?
Well, you know what? I can. I think there's going to be a couple of things. One is just, how does she interpret herself? Like, what does she believe about herself and as a woman and her place in marriage? And does she have an understanding of the value that God has for her as a woman in marriage? So your understanding of that is really going to be an obstacle. So for me, for instance, I'll just share with you my issue. The way I grew up, I understood that marriage was, all about the man. And the woman didn't really have a voice. It didn't really matter about her needs as long as his needs were being met. She was there to sacrifice for him. And and she didn't really matter. And so her greatest value really came from hiding behind him And you know, I had a warped view of submission. So immediately it wasn't this sense of I'm a person with dignity and I need to be treated, but I need to know that inside of me. Otherwise, I'm not going to bring that to the relationship. Mm. So if she doesn't know who she is, and if she doesn't address how she, you know, her view of marriage. And so depending on how you experienced it and what you witnessed, you can either become this, you know, like the feminist type of mentality. I am woman, hear me roar. I'm going to make you love me and I'll prove to you. Or you can be this mousy woman who's afraid to say anything to her husband. He's always right.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an obstacle for her to overcome if she's going to come as a peer. Mm-hmm. And realize that she has value. And to even invite him to begin to respect that. Mm-hmm. If she doesn't respect it, if she can't hold that in a way that's not contentious, mm-hmm. in a way that's not belligerent, but is welcoming, because a woman is to be nurturing and welcoming. If she can't do that in that way, he's not going to want to get to know her. Mm. Because the more contentious we become, right, the less they want to get close. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're united, but they've got these claws up.
Exactly.
So,
yeah,
you know, that would be, you know,
a big one.
One of the issues is just your past, you know, what you believe about that. I think another thing would be her body. Carla, you work with women, and you're always talking about becoming fit in the body, I would imagine, and nutrition and all that. But what was her understanding of her body? That's huge. Because if she hates her body, think of the impact that has. And if a man touches her, how does she respond to that? So while you may crave touch, certain touch may be very frightening. It may cause you to recoil. Mm-hmm. So it's not only her understanding of marriage, but her understanding of sexuality, her understanding of her body. That, you know, is it for his enjoyment? Is it for her enjoyment? Is she allowed to even enjoy how her body feels? Mm-hmm. Our bodies are a reflection of our souls as a woman, to be a nurturer. But we can try to be this. You know, I remember dealing with some gals and their whole perception was they needed to be muscular and strong. And there was that sense of hardness. And the whole idea of being soft and welcoming was almost repulsive to them. And so it's like, where did that come from? So, you know, her body. And, you know, and I remember growing up as a young gal, the impression I had was that she needed to be thin. And she needed to be fit. And again, her body was for his enjoyment. Didn't really matter if she enjoyed sex. And you remember the conversations you have with your mother and you think, whoa, like what was that about? So those are going to be major obstacles. And I think what happens is we as women can become disconnected from our bodies. And what I mean by that, Carla, is we almost feel like our body betrays us. I want to be seen as a disciplined person, and yet my body shows that I'm not. I'm fat. I'm out of shape. And so it's like, I want to present something that my body shows me differently. We have a very difficult time seeing ourselves as a composite whole, that my body actually, and the way I carry my body, actually reflects my soul and my spirit and what I understand to be true about me. And so a woman's obstacle is bringing all these things together to say, what is the proper view? How does God see me? And how do I become this integrated whole person rather than having all these disconnected parts and operating like they're separate, so that my body is separate until I get to sex. And then when we have sex, it's separate from my soul. And so I enter sex just simply from a physical thing rather than as a relational whole person. So that's
there's a lot there.
that there is a lot there, but those are the obstacles that are going to hinder us from really coming together and being vulnerable and growing as a couple.
Yeah. What about for guys, Sharon? What about for men? You know, like, what would you say, what are the obstacles that a man sort of has to overcome in order to connect better with his wife? It's another big question.
Okay, you know, Waldy and I were, yeah, exactly. Waldy and I were talking about this, and you know, Waldy and I were great in partnership. We both loved to work, but if we had relational issues, he saw it as my issue because he didn't see anything going on in his own life. It couldn't have been him, and because my family was more visible with dysfunction, then it had to be my issue. And so, like he said, he was so sufficiently disconnected from his internal world. He didn't even realize what was going on. So for a man, I mean, think of the beliefs that you have to go back and say, what did they grow up believing a man was? And how has our world structured it for them to be a man? And I think this is a very big challenge, especially today and for white males, because like there's so much opposition for them. So I mean, if they're raised to be strong and in control, and yet there's push against that, and if they're told you're not emotional, and yet share your heart, it's like, you know, like boys don't cry, you know, and sometimes they're shut down rather than encouraged, you know, because there's this fear that if you coddle a young boy and actually comfort him and nurture him when he's crying, that somehow he's not going to be a tough man. And so that's a huge obstacle for them. So it's like, you know, a man can look at a woman with her emotions and be intrigued and go, that's really interesting, all those emotions out there. But it's like, I don't know what to do with that. It's because they've never been in touch with their own. And has there been a safe place for them to even explore that? So that's a huge obstacle for men, is to know how to be curious, how to actually enter into his wife to get to know her, because we might be more willing to share our hearts, but we want to hear theirs too. And that's what makes us feel connected. But if they're so disconnected from their hearts, it's like, I want to work with you, honey, but nothing's coming. And so he's got to be willing to go on that hard journey of going, what's going on inside of me? And to realize he has an internal world as well that needs to be tapped into. So that, I would say that is going to be one of the obstacles that men have to overcome as they go into this relationship work.
Yeah. No, that's good. And, you know, thank you for sharing that, because, yeah, like, you know, the things that you're sharing, I'm like, yes, like, I totally get that. You know, the obstacles that women have, the obstacles that men have, and you bring that together in a relationship with these obstacles and with the baggage and with the sinful nature, and you can get a pretty big mess. And it's no wonder, it's actually it's more of a miracle that any marriage survives at all when you really think about it in terms of like all the things that are going on to make this marriage happen and to make it a good, thriving marriage, right? So, like, you know, praise God for all the marriages that do not just survive, but actually thrive, right? Like that's a blessing. Yeah.
Well, and then when people actually understand the goodness that's there if they do the work, you know, because God, there is such goodness, there is such richness. And I think that's the thing that I've been so blessed by, is to see Waldy grow and become the man that he is today. And by his influence and his impact in my life, to become who I am today. So that's the upside and the joy of a couple being willing to enter into the hard work. So there's some really good stuff to it if you're willing to stay with it and work at it. Yeah.
Man, Sharon, like, I wish we had a lot more time here, because I feel like I could talk to you for a long time about all of this stuff, and like, you know, just being a woman, right? Like what all that, and maybe I need to have you on again if you're willing, you know, like talk about more like, what is a woman? Like, what is her role? What does it look like? What does marriage look like? What's your role? Because a lot of stuff that you were saying about like how you felt as a woman in a marriage, like that's kind of me too, right? Like I'm still trying to figure out like, yeah, what exactly
Yeah.
does that look like, especially in our culture? Because in the
Yeah.
past, it was a little bit more clear. I think like the woman, this is what she did. Well, now you have these working moms, you have working women. Like, how does that all fit? And then there's a lot of people that like to point fingers and be like, you're not doing it right. You're supposed to be doing, you're
Oh,
supposed
I
to
know.
homeschool, or you're supposed to be in the kitchen all the time, or you're supposed to do all these things. And it's kind of
Yeah.
like, how do you navigate all of that? And what does God actually say? Like, what does the scripture say? Not
Absolutely.
what does this church say? Not as what's the tradition, but what does the Bible actually say? What does God say about it? And that seems to be, it's quite a bit of work to peel back and push back all the things that people bring
Yes.
in with them, all these little rules and boundaries and, parameters, and realize that no, it's actually a bigger picture than what I think
Mhm.
the common person sees, right? And everybody has a bit of a different experience with
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
But I feel like, man, that would be a really neat topic to get into. Maybe at another time I would love to do
Yes.
that. But I appreciate everything that you said about marriage, Sharon, and again, like it's really spurring me on to be like, I got to keep pushing. I got to keep, say, no, Jason, like, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about this because he is that more, maybe a little bit more that stoic man too, right? And it's like, no, like, come on, like you can share it. And I am
Mhm.
actually, Sharon, I'm kind of a stoic woman. I'm not a typical emotional woman. So he's
Yes.
stoic, I'm stoic, and we think that that's a really powerful way to be. So you get these two stoic people, like it's pretty hard to connect when you're both like putting walls up all the time and like, oh, like, let's not talk about this. Let's not talk about that, right? So that's kind of a bit of a problem in our marriage,
Yeah.
is just making sure like peel back the layers, like let's get into all the nitty gritty. Let's
Mhm.
get into the
Mhm.
emotions. Let's let it out. Let's talk about it. And like you said, not just your dreams, but also the ugly stuff, the baggage, the things that you struggle with, right?
Absolutely.
And not that we haven't talked
Absolutely.
about it, because we have, but
Yes.
I feel like there's another level, a way deeper level that would be really helpful for us to get to.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what? If you don't, you're going to go through so many seasons of life.
Mhm.
Like when you have children, it's different than when your children get to a certain age. And Waldy and I are in a different season altogether. We're in transition. And so if you don't build the foundation now, like how are you going to weather all these various changes and menopause and hormone changes and losses and job changes? Like all those things impact it. And they, we're not stagnant people. We're
Yeah.
fluid. And so there's more to learn about Waldy and there's more to learn about me. So to think that you know your partner, whew, that's craziness.
I know.
I'm still learning lots about them. So see, that's where, and the truth of the matter is, Carla, because I can identify with you, we were stoic. We worked hard. We could kick butt and get the job done.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter was we both had desires in our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And those desires were not being met.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that emotional level, we still longed to be connected. We just didn't know how to do it.
Right.
And we were both, I was embarrassed. I think there was fear, because a woman is afraid that if she's vulnerable, she's going to be rejected.
Mm-hmm.
Like these things, I didn't share them because we have all those fears that what if he's not impressed because he married me because I'm this self-sufficient woman.
Mm-hmm.
And what if he thinks, oh, she's not self-sufficient. And now what have I got on my hands?
I know. That's been a huge
yeah.
change for me, because I went from being just like, I was at home with the kids. We were homeschooling for a lot of years. I was like Little House on the Prairie, doing the gardening and all this. And now all of a sudden I'm running this business. And sometimes he's like, I don't even know you. Like, I thought I knew you. Like, what's going on? Right. And so I think instead of seeing that as a threat, like, oh my goodness, you're changing. What do I do with that? It's like, this is cool. Let's see, let's dive into this. What's going on here, right? And I think like that's where I think people, there's that fear. It's like, oh, do we really want to dive into this, or should we just put those walls up and carry on and be like ships passing in the night, right? Like, no, we don't want to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Although, yeah,
that's right. Not if we want the good.
That's right. Yeah. So Sharon, where do people go if they want to connect with you, maybe learn a little bit more about you, or maybe like, I don't know what you have to offer right now for people, but maybe they're like, you know what, Sharon, I need help in my marriage. I don't know, you and Wally have done marriage conferences, and Jason and I have gone to one of your conferences. We love it. I don't know if you're still doing that, but where can people go to get help in marriage, or maybe even as a woman wondering like, I don't know, like what you're saying, Sharon, makes sense to me. How do I dive into this and explore this further? Where would you send them?
Yeah. Well, we're in transition right now. And so I can't say I've got Instagram accounts and all that kind of stuff. Probably the best place is just on Facebook. They can message me.
Okay.
And because of that transition, I'm not necessarily counseling full-time right now. So that's where it's like they can message me. I'm still open to go speak, to teach some courses in a church to help with marriage and family and stuff like that. But so they can contact me, but I'm not really offering counseling per se right now.
But maybe you could refer them to somebody?
Yeah, possibly. I can see what they're after and point them in a direction.
Even if it's just like a
maybe
book.
Even refer them to some books.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. I think
yes.
I read that Telling Yourself the Truth book. I'm pretty sure at PRBI I read that book. Who was the author of that book?
It's two. It's Backus. William Backus is one, and Marie Chapin is the other.
Okay. I'm sure I read those books. I think I read
two authors.
Yeah. In fact,
well,
maybe
you would have taken my people helping course then.
Okay, or maybe, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it was you or somebody else. But anyways, I do remember those books. And I think I can see it sitting on my shelf right now. And when you said the authors, I'm like, oh, I remember that. So I'm sure I read that. And I probably should read it again. It probably would be helpful to read it again. But yeah, it's so good talking to you, Sharon. I just, really appreciate everything that you said here. I've got a lot out of it. I know my listeners are going to get a lot out of it. And yeah, I would really love to do something like this again sometime. So thank you.
Sure. That sounds great. Well, all the best to you, Carla, and what you're doing as well, and in your journey with Jason.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. You too. This episode is brought to you by my company, Power Fitness Online. We are a tight-knit fitness community, and we guide you every step of the way to get fit and stay fit through our live workouts, nutrition coaching, and incredible support team. Go to powerfitnessedson.com to learn more. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. If you enjoyed it, please leave a positive review on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Music, or wherever you're listening. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, I would love to see your comments. I would love to know what you think about this episode and interact with you. I love hearing from you. Once again, I'm Carla Rand, and this is The Carla Rand Show, and I can't wait to see you next week for our next episode.